No. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Northshire Live Bookseller Book Chat. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. My name is Rachel Person. I'm the event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Saratoga Springs, New York. Here, as I so often am, these pandemic days with my friend and colleague, Davith Wood, event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Manchester Center, Vermont. Before we get started, a couple of very quick notes. First of all, you probably noticed as you come in that we are recording this evening's presentation. It will be broadcast later on our YouTube channel. However, fear not. Those of you who are muted will not appear in that recording. We are only recording those of us who are unmuted and speaking. Please do make use of the chat throughout the evening with any comments that you have, and that way you won't be recorded for perpetuity. And then last of all, before we get started, a note. You've probably been hearing about all sorts of supply chain disruptions happening, not just in the book world, but throughout the supply chain nationally with all sorts of different items. We are hearing that the book supplies may be more messed up than ever. We will certainly not run out of books. There will be plenty of books that we love that we can tell you about right through the holidays. But if there are specific titles you know you want, you can really help us help you by shopping early. So please do shop early and local throughout the holidays. Thank you all so much for being here. And Davith will now take us away and introduce our first bookseller guest.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I'm really looking forward to tonight. This is always one of the most fun events. I have made a blog post that I'm putting in the chat right now of all of the books that will be presented tonight, and you can find it there at that link, or likewise, you can go to northshire.com and just go to the notes from the Shire. It is the most current or the latest blog post there. Well, first off is Northshire Manchester bookseller, Samantha Beitler, who's going to tell us about some of the books that she's been reading. Samantha, take it away.
Hi guys, I hope everyone's having a good evening. So I love doing bookseller chats, and I've read a bunch of recent books, but this batch unfortunately is older books, which I also really love and I think deserve as much credit as new releases. So I have a wide variety here, be it, science, true crime, as well as graphic novels, but we'll just dive right on in. If you have any questions, just let me know. So my first one is Ian McEwan. He is very well known for his novel Atonement, which was also a beautiful movie. I really love his delicate humor, and he's just a wonderful writer. This is actually a really, really, really interesting idea. It's actually a delightful retelling of Shakespeare's Hamlet. I'm a big fan of Hamlet. It's actually my favorite of the Shakespeare tragedies, and Nutshell is basically a wild ride from a very unlikely perspective, which is from a 9-month-old fetus. And he kind of listens to his mother and his uncle Claude, based on Claudius, plot the murder of his sweet and innocent and unassuming father. It's just very poignant and hilarious, and it's honestly unlike anything that I personally ever read before. I haven't really dove into his other books, but I would, if you are a fan or you've never even heard of him, I would definitely recommend this title, especially for Shakespeare fans. So the next one I'm going to talk about is Maggie Nelson, Bluets. It's a collection of poems. Maggie Nelson is somebody that is actually, I'm very touched by a lot of her writings. She has this very raw, emotional writing style that is gorgeous and in a weird way terrifying, but it's just a wild ride. She actually wrote a wonderful autobiography called The Argonauts, and it's heartbreaking and heartwarming and it's fantastic. But to focus on Bluets is one of her first books of poetry that she wrote, and it's very raw and emotional. It's numbered poems that each relate to the author Maggie Nelson's personal experience, interwoven with her interpretations of the color blue. It's very lyrical, it's hauntingly beautiful, and she will make you laugh and make you cry. I can definitely relate to a lot of the stuff that she writes, and I think each and every person, regardless of their background, can definitely see themselves in some of the different things that she writes in these very short but gorgeously written poems. The next book I'm going to talk about is absolutely totally from a different genre. It's actually science, specifically chemistry. So speaking from experience, I actually never took chemistry. I don't know actually why I picked this book up. And I think the name really got to me. It's called The Disappearing Spoon and Other True Tales of Madness, Love, and History from the Worlds of the Periodic Table of Elements. So essentially what it is Sam Keen is this wonderful science writer. He's absolutely fantastic and he makes science fun. He has a few other books, one which I will be talking about next, but I know he has a geology book called The Violinist's Thumb. And essentially what he does is he goes through nearly the entire periodic table of elements and discusses not only the discovery of them, but also interesting anecdotes. For example, one that is very close to me is the Radium and the Radium Girls based in West Orange. I know when my parents bought our house when I was growing up in Montclair, New Jersey, we still to this day have to test the soil for radium because it was such an intense thing and so many people. It was just interesting to learn about that, as well as from a perspective that I know nothing of chemistry, all of the varieties of elements on the table. He's funny, he's insightful, and you learn so much. And it's really cool. It's more like reading an anthology of just interesting stories rather than tales of how the elements were discovered and just random facts about them. He talks about Gandhi to how stars are formed. He goes all over the map, and it's something that even if you are not necessarily interested in science, which I can fully admit and have admitted in the past that I'm not, there's something for everyone, and it's a really enjoyable read. So next I'm going to talk about his latest release. I am a big fan of Sam Keen and also a gigantic true crime fan. I'm a huge true crime junkie. And his newest pick, The Ice Pick Surgeon, Murder, Fraud, Sabotage, Piracy, and Other Dastardly Deeds Perpetrated in the Name of Science, is a wild ride. I know I keep using that phrase, but it's genuinely fantastic and horrifying. He talks about everything from MK Ultra to Soviet spies and the Manhattan Project to the foundation of the lobotomy. And it's many, many, many different things that, as he mentions, dastardly deeds that have been, done in the name of science. It talks about the Hippocratic Oath, and it kind of delves into it spans genres from science to true crime to even murder mysteries, where he kind of hypothesizes what actually happened, to philosophy and discussing the Hippocratic Oath, the ethical standards of, for one example, using Joseph Mengele's, different things. And granted, he's not for it, no one should be, but it's an interesting read. You learn so much from him, and once again, very similar to The Disappearing Spoon. He has a very humorous writing style that makes you laugh out loud while you're learning about science, about true crime. It's enjoyable, and I think it's absolutely wonderful. Switching back to fiction, I'm sure everyone and their mother has read this or at least heard of it. It's been on the bestseller for many, many, many years or months. It's The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I read Circe first. I believe this was her first novel. She could be wrong about this, but I believe that she wrote this over the span of 10 years as she was teaching both Latin and Greek. I'm not entirely sure where, but I believe it was a prestigious college. Song of Achilles is one of the most beautifully reimagined, imaginative retellings of the ancient tale of the warrior Achilles, but it's actually from the perspective of his confidant and eventual lover, Patroclus. And it kind of discusses how he follows him, throughout his entire journey, especially within Troy, and it's just one of the best, most heartwarming and beautiful books I've ever read. Madeline Miller is very talented in that she has this wonderful ability to tell stories as if, to listen to the narrator as if you're listening to a friend. Sometimes she writes them past tense, and it's as if somebody's sitting by a fireside chat with you and discussing them with you. And I absolutely love that about her. I cannot honestly wait for her new book. I don't believe maybe she's in the process of writing one, but I'm kind of like addicted to her now. I did read Circe first. As I mentioned, this was her first release. I think they're wonderful companion pieces, and I cannot recommend this enough, especially for anybody who is a Greek mythology fan. I was definitely growing up. I, as a kid, read more Greek myths than I did picture books. So I think anyone who's a Greek myth nut will absolutely love it. And anyone who doesn't really know anything about those will also love it. It's a wonderful, wonderful history lesson and beautiful story rolled into one. And speaking of that, there's another wonderful book that I recently finished. It's Hamnet. Also a best-selling fiction piece. Hamnet is a wonderful and equally wonderful piece of historical fiction. Hamnet tells the story of a young woman named Agnes, who is this carefree, clairvoyant, hawk-owning young woman who meets and falls in love with a young Latin tutor who's just thirsty to leave his very small town environment. Though it's never particularly stated, it is based on the Latin tutor is based on William Shakespeare, and it mixes kind of an element of fantasy as well as historical fiction. It does follow almost to a T the events, the tragedies, and the accomplishments that Shakespeare and his wife went throughout their lives. And it's just, Maggie O'Farrell has this beautifully delicate descriptive prose that makes you just turn the pages and want to keep going and going and going. It's really wonderful for fans of Shakespeare. I grew up loving Shakespeare, and it's always nice to see, a different perspective, especially from his wife, Anne Hathaway, that is who Agnes is based off of, who's much more of a lesser known character. She's basically stayed in the shadows, and it's a nice idea to kind of, even get a fictional glimpse of what it was like for her living away from Shakespeare, and the idea of his notoriety and how it affected her daily life. And it's very cool. If you're not even familiar or a fan of Shakespeare, it's still a wonderful book to pick up. It's beautiful, and I would recommend it to nearly everyone. My last piece is something that's really, really near and dear to my heart. I'm a big fan of graphic novels. I grew up reading comic books, and a friend of mine stumbled upon this graphic novel called The Underwater Welder. Jeff Lemire is somebody who's very near and dear to my heart. He actually, I don't personally know him, but I would love to meet him. So he's a really fantastic graphic novel artist and writer. He is based out of Canada, and he has these absolutely hauntingly beautiful illustrations. He is best known for his work Sweet Tooth, which was recently produced as a television show via Robert Downey Jr.'s production company. But Underwater Welder is a standalone piece it's very similar to an episode of The Twilight Zone. And that's basically what he based it off of. It's eerie, it's sentimental, and it's just reminiscent of a story that pulls everything together at the last moment and makes it so gorgeous and heart-wrenching, and you'll cry because it's just so gorgeous. And that combined with his kind of eerie, very different and very unique illustration style just makes it even more memorable. He's somebody whose work has, it crosses genres of romance to sci-fi to mystery, and this particular graphic novel of all of his pieces is my absolute favorite. If you are not very familiar with the graphic novel genre, this is a definite great introduction to it, because it is a standalone piece. It's dramatic, it's heart-wrenching, but it's also just so poignant and beautiful, and just, it's fantastic. So that is all I have. Thank you for letting me gush about my favorite books.
Thank you so much, Samantha. That was great. Just a reminder to everyone, we do have all of the books that are being recommended tonight on our blog post, which is in the chat, and I can put it in again for everyone else who's come in. Next up, we have a bookseller from our Saratoga Springs store. That's Kirstin Swartz. It's always a delight to have on. She reads a vast amount, and it's a pleasure to welcome you back, Kirstin. Tell us about what you've been reading.
Hi, everybody. Good to be back. I think I haven't done one of these since the early spring, so that's given me time to binge through a couple books, and I have a few recommendations for you. For people who know my recommendations, I primarily have a lot of mystery books, but I do delve into general fiction, romance, young adult. Nonfiction's been a tough one this year, so no nonfiction tonight, but let me get right into it. So a few of the books I have physically, some of them I don't, so I do apologize about that. The first book I'm going to discuss is called The Night She Disappeared by Lisa Jewell. Most of you who are mystery lovers may know Lisa Jewell. She has come out with probably a dozen mystery books at this point, at least one book a year she releases, and she's very good at writing three-dimensional characters, but a lot of her stories do revolve around a missing girl. So while the plot itself is a little redundant at this point, with most of her stories, she still makes it super, super original. This has three different perspectives and three different timelines, but we primarily follow along with how it came to be and the aftermath of it, the disappearance of two young adults, Tallulah and Zach, who have just recently become surprise parents to their son. One is 18, one is 19, and they disappear after a night out that they haven't had a decent night out since having this child, and are missing for over a year. So a year later, this woman, who is the girlfriend of the new head administrator of Tallulah's college, her university, though she is attending in England, she moves onto the campus with her boyfriend, and she's a cozy mystery writer herself. And whether it's because of her moving onto the campus or because of it coming, like being around a year after this couple has disappeared, a new clue pops up, and so Sophia, the writer, uncovers it. It's this evidence that is in a hole that says like dig here, and she digs it up and finds more evidence on the disappearance or maybe murder of this couple. So you're following along with what she's finding out in this present timeline. We are also following along with Tallulah and what happened to her before this disappearance. She's a new mom. This relationship is not as perfect as everybody thought it was. And she's got some weird friendships, maybe something more with her classmate Scarlett, that seem to be affecting how she feels about being a mother and being a girlfriend. So it's got a lot going on. It all comes together really well in the end. And it's just a really great fast-paced mystery. And definitely good if you need to get back into the reading vibes and you're having a bit of a reader's block. Always jump into Lisa Jewell. She's really good with getting you into it. The next book I'm going to talk about, I feel like I've mentioned in my past few book talks, only because I read it so early and I was like dying for it to be released. But this one is called Never Saw Me Coming by Vera Kurian. It is a debut novel. And it finally just came out last month, and I was so excited. This one is a mystery as well. It's a campus novel, which is one of my favorite books to come out in the fall. I love dark academia. I especially love more stories set on college campuses, which this one is. It's nice to see like people still like, you know, in that age of learning and getting an education and getting it together, but not always being set in high school. It's nice to have a college story. Anyways, our main character that we follow, her name is Chloe, and she's a freshman starting to attend this university that's in Washington, D.C. She gets a full ride to the school because she is a diagnosed psychopath. And the school is having an experimental program where 8 diagnosed psychopath students are part of an experiment where they wear smartwatches, like think like Fitbit or Apple Watch, that study their mood, their behavior, where they're walking on campus, what they're doing, how they're sleeping. And the head psychologist of the study will interview them weekly. Basically, they're lab rats. They're being studied. They're psychopaths who are aware that they're psychopaths and they're trying to fit into society. And Chloe is a social chameleon. Like, she can be quiet and academic in certain groups, or she can be super bubbly and super sorority girl in other groups. And that works for her because although it's nice to get a full ride scholarship to attend school in DC, she is actually at the school to kill this guy named Will from her past. And she's got the plan. She's like, I'm going to be a straight and narrow citizen after this, but I am going to murder him by the end of the semester and also get A's in all my classes. So that's already a great concept. But starting into the semester, somebody's killing off all the participants in the study. And they're all supposed to be anonymous. Like, you're not supposed to know who you're in the study with. And it's a huge campus, so it's pretty difficult to figure out who's in the study. But somebody knows who they are, and they're killing them one by one. And Chloe only cares about the fact that it's getting in her way of killing Will. So she tracks down a few other participants in the study who also don't want to die. And they start working together, trying to figure out if it's another participant or if it's someone who's working on the study, or maybe somebody who used to be in the study. So it's really funny. It's really action-packed and a really original take. The author herself is a psychologist, I believe. So she had that kind of inner understanding about, the different forms of psychopath. Like I said, Chloe's a social chameleon, so she can make herself be however she wants to be. And that's never going to be her true self, whatever that is. And another character we follow is Charles, and he's a junior at this college and has been in the program for 2 years at this point. And he is extremely aware that he can't feel the same emotions that his classmates and girlfriend and parents can feel. And he tries very hard to mimic them and tries very hard to have the same reactions and outside emotions as you're supposed to have as a normal person. So you've got 2 different versions of people, and it's just worked out so well. So I really enjoyed it. Really good cat and mouse story. The next book I'm going to talk about is a much more lighthearted fiction story, and I was really surprised with how much I enjoyed it. This one is called Ghosts by Dolly Alderton, originally published in the UK and was able to come out this summer in the US. And it was really, really good. I would compare it to Bridget Jones' Diary, but honestly, it's even more than that. I would say that if you were a fan of Bridget Jones' Diary, then you will like this. But this is more relatable. Like, I felt like the narrator, Nina Dean, was like a best friend talking to me about all the stuff she's got to deal with and that she's going through in her life. Rachel, our event manager, actually recommended it to me and a few other booksellers in the store. So thank you, Rachel. I really, really enjoyed it, and I have no regrets at all. Nina Dean, she's a food writer. She's got a couple of cookbooks out. She's just spent the past 2 years before this story celibate, single, getting her own place, getting her own finances. And she feels like she's put together, and she feels like she's at a point where she can start dating again. She gets on this dating app very similar to Tinder. It's called Links. And her first match and first date is the man of her dreams. His name is Max, and he looks like a lumberjack, but he's also smart, and he's also a good listener. And they vibe very well. They date for a few months. Everything seems good. It seems like a genuine relationship is coming out of this. Then about 3 or 4 months in, he says the big words, "I love you." And she says them back. And the next day, he's gone. He has ghosted her. He had no social media to start, which she didn't think about too much. But now she can't find him. She doesn't know if he's alive. She doesn't know what happened or why he bailed on the relationship, because she took it very seriously. And it all kind of comes crumbling down that maybe she doesn't understand herself or what she wants or the world that she's in and the life that she has as much as she should at this point. Her friends are changing and growing. There's issues with her parents. Her father's going through dementia, and she's just not dealing with these things. She's not like, she doesn't have to have, she realizes she doesn't need a man to find her happiness, but she does need companionship. She does need to fix the broken parts of the relationships in her life. It doesn't have to be with Max, but it does have to be with her friends and family. And I really love how the narrator channeled some of these struggles. And there was just some chapters of this book where I was just like, yes, I think that every day. So I really liked it. It felt like almost nonfiction at some points when I was reading it, but it was a really good fiction, really good lighthearted story. Yeah, that's it for Ghosts. The next one I'm going to talk about is going to be a graphic novel published, I believe, on November 2nd. But before it was going to be a printed graphic novel, this series, which is called Lore Olympus, was on, and is still on, this app called Webtoon, which is basically like downloadable comic book series and graphic novel series. And I have been following this series and this author and illustrator since she came out with the first season of this story. And I would say that anyone that's fans of Greek mythology and Greek mythology retellings is really going to love Lore Olympus. It's based primarily around the mythology of Persephone and Hades, and takes a lot of the plot on that. But a lot of other Greek god characters and humans and all that stuff are addressed. So it's just like this wonderful retelling of Persephone and Hades. Olympus and the underworld are kind of set in the modern world. Everyone's wearing modern clothing, but the mortal world is set like, in ancient Greece kind of world. The illustrations are beautiful. I'll show you on my phone if you can see that. But that's Hades. He's a blue guy and he's very handsome. Let me see if I can get Persephone for you. My phone's not working, but it's fine. There's Persephone right there. And she's just this beautiful pink being. And they, kind of fall in love, and she's figuring out herself. I think it's a really great graphic novel series for anyone, probably 15 and over. There's some very important, tough topics that are addressed. And Rachel Smythe, the author and illustrator, she uses this artwork and these gods to address these topics and help you feel heard and understood. It's really refreshing and mentally amazing, and just an amazing story as well. So that's coming out in print form November 2nd. And any fans of graphic novels or Greek mythology or Madeline Miller, I highly, highly recommend this series. It's beautiful. The next one I'm going to talk about, I have an actual physical copy of. Woo! So it's called A Slow Fire Burning, and that is by Paula Hawkins. If this name sounds familiar to you, it's because she wrote the groundbreaking suspense novel Girl on the Train, which I personally think kickstarted a contemporary love for mystery and suspense. While Girl on the Train was great, I also think that Paula Hawkins has just improved her writing, and her storylines with every new novel. Into the Water by her as well was very well done. I will always recommend it. And I was not disappointed with A Slow Fire Burning. She just keeps topping herself. So to get started, this guy is murdered on his houseboat, which is a thing. He lives on a boat in England, and it's a brutal murder. It's definitely not just like some random thing. And several women who are involved or maybe not involved in his life are the narrators that you follow. So one of them is his nosy houseboat neighbor, Miriam, who has her own troubled past, but she's a terrible person sometimes, but you love to follow her. And then his aunt Carla, who is very rich and well off, but she's also got her own very traumatic and tragic past that's related to this man that has died. And also his one night stand that literally just happened the night before the murder, Laura, who is physically and mentally disabled. And she's probably my favorite narrative to follow. She just got so much backstory, and she's so interesting. And she's just this fiery, hot mess gal, and you just want to root for her so bad and beg that she's not actually the murderer. And I won't tell you who is, but it's very suspenseful. You have no idea who is doing this or who's involved up until the very end. And yeah, I love that about Paula Hawkins. It's my favorite type of mystery, when you have no idea what's going to happen. The next two books I'm going to discuss are a 2-in-1 kind of discussion, because they are a book duology. This is a young adult Romeo and Juliet retelling. The first book is These Violent Delights, and the newest book that's coming out in November is Our Violent Ends. And this is by Chloe Gong. She was 17 when she wrote the first book. 17. And she got this published, and it is a bestseller. And she has the second book coming out next month, and she's got another book coming out next year, and I'm extremely proud of her. This is set in the 1920s Shanghai gangster era, and it's a really amazing retelling. Not only are the characters and the families like fleshed out and just in like really cool storytelling. The two main characters, Juliet, who is Juliet with 2 T's in this, Juliet Kai, is 19 years old. She was just a flapper girl for the past 5 years before this story in the US, has just returned to claim her throne as the heir of the Red Scarlets, the Chinese gang based out of Shanghai. And their rival gang is Romeo, who is Roma Montagov in this story. And that's their rival gang. His gang, which is the Russian White Flowers. So very multicultural. They've had their, first love experience. It ended horribly. They're now a little bit more grown up, and it's very enemies to lovers kind of storyline. They hate each other. But what brings them together is that there's a monster roaming the streets of Shanghai that is somehow spreading a pandemic. And very timely for us living in a pandemic. But this pandemic is much more gruesome and a higher mortality rate. So Juliet and Roma agree to set aside their blood feud against each other's gangs to work together and figure out who is controlling this monster and why are they doing this. It also involves very real life conflict of communists and nationalists and the political tension going on in China and in Shanghai as a big trading city at this time. Feels really fresh with the gangster mindset. Roma and Juliet have an amazing dynamic. They're just really grown up, and I think the author really captures that tragic perfectness of their love for each other, despite everything that's happened between them. So Our Violent Ends was an amazing conclusion to this storyline, and I think you guys should give this a try. So I have one last book that I'm going to quickly discuss. I had just finished it last night, and this book is called Heard It in a Love Song. And this is by Tracy Garvis Graves. She previously wrote The Girl He Used to Know, which broke my heart into a million pieces. And I was not left as heartbroken with this one, but I was not disappointed either. To give you the gist, we're following two characters, Layla and Josh. They're both in their late 30s. They both are recently separated / divorced from their longtime partners. Layla is the music teacher to Josh's kindergarten daughter, Sasha, and they meet through that connection. But they have a very deep understanding of each other because it's extremely hard for them to even consider getting back into dating after these long-term relationships and how the dating world is now with dating apps and all the facade you have to do. That's so amazing. So they kind of become friends with potential, as they call it, and start to get to know each other really well. And I wouldn't say it's much of a romance, because as you're learning and getting to know the Josh and Layla of this present time that are getting to know each other, you're also hearing the love stories of their past, like how they found their first loves, Josh with his first love, Kimmy, who they marry when they're 18, and Layla with Liam, who falls in love with her while she's a touring local rock star with her band. And he falls in love with how powerful and commanding she is of the stage. And you see how they could have fallen in love with each other, but you also discover how these first relationships just burn out and die, and how well compatible Josh and Layla are. So I was a very lighthearted read. It's not really a romance. It's not really fiction. It's some beautiful love song in the middle. So I think it's just a great fall read to wrap up in a blanket and enjoy it. And yeah, that's all the books I have for tonight. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Kirstin. Fabulous as always. There is a question for you in the chat, actually, from Beth. She wants to know if you've ever read We Were Never Here, which is one of Reese Witherspoon's picks.
We Were Never Here is a newish mystery, I believe. I've got it on display and I've been meaning to read it, but unfortunately my mystery pile is ridiculously huge right now. But because of your recommendation, I'd be happy to move it up my list. So thank you.
Thanks so much. We all have really terrible piles of to be read books. Mine gets bigger every day. It feels like they keep coming in and nothing stops. Well, thank you so much. Our next and final presenter tonight is a newer bookseller at our Manchester location. That's Connor Johnston. We're happy to have you on, Connor. Take us away.
Very excited. So I'm starting off with, this was I read over the summer, Untitled Life, Merlin Sheldrake. This is a really interesting science book about the world of mushrooms that you may not know. Mushrooms have sort of had like a real explosion recently. But I didn't really know how much, other than, you know, at the grocery store or psilocybin mushrooms, how much actually existed. But this Merlin Sheldrake is a mycologist, someone who gets on his knees in Panama and is digging through tree roots to find where mushroom roots then start to connect to trees and create this whole network that exists. And since reading this, I've not been able to sort of see the world in a little bit of a different way, just going on a hike and seeing a flower that's totally white and going, oh, that's a flower he talks about in his book that has stopped photosynthesizing. It's totally started using the whole mycelium network underground to get its nutrients. Doesn't even use the sun, a flower that doesn't even use the sun to get energy anymore. And the possibility of mushrooms to be able to convert our waste or oil spills and clean up our earth is really hopeful and interesting. And I also appreciate in the center of his book, he contains lots of pictures because he does do a really good job describing a lot of things that happen with mushrooms. But in the center, there are contains like every single thing he talks about, like a mushroom spreading out to find a key or piece of wood. And once it touches the wood, it then narrows down all of its fronds and just goes straight to the wood, and how efficient mushrooms are. And if you read this, it's actually really not that crazy read. And he really makes it easy to understand despite the complexity of mushrooms all around us. So it makes it a not really hard read and just something that will sort of change the way you think of just a simple mushroom you see at the grocery store. So I highly recommend this for a nonfiction selection. This next book is the reading list. This is the first book that I read after coming on at Northshire, my first pre-release read. Sarah Nisha Adams, this is her debut novel. This took me on a very wild roller coaster. It takes place in Wembley, England, which is just outside of London. And the main characters are Alicia, who is 17 years old and works at a library, but is not a reader whatsoever. And Mukesh, who is a widower. His wife has recently passed away, and he feels sort of left by his family, who is much more closer to his wife. And the whole story surrounds a reading list, which is a list of really classic novels that have been sort of found in books and by Alicia, who then starts to recommend these books to Mukesh, who comes into the library after finding his late wife's copy of Rebecca in his house, and he reads it. And so he makes his way to the library, and that starts their connection. It really has quite a roller coaster of emotion. Alicia has quite a difficult home life. Her mother has extreme depression, and her brother is just out of school and is like working full time. So there's a lot of issues dealt with, like mental health in the story, both from Alicia and Mukesh, who felt very alone. But in the end, there sort of is this kind of hopeful ending with community and finding help within their community and saving their local library, which is not a spoiler at all, just so you know. But if you're looking for a very emotionally complex, but also something that'll make you feel good at the end and not totally shattered. Reading list, really great. I'm waiting for her next book to come out. Who knows when, but looking forward to it. Now that we're in October, this next book's Hex by Thomas Bold-Hubelt, a Dutch author, is perfect. This stars Catherine, who's a witch who's been haunting this town, Black Spring, in upstate New York on the Hudson for now 300 years. After she was hung by a Dutch colony, she had not left, and she continues to haunt the town basically. And Hex is a ultra modern security firm in the town that monitors her wherever she goes, and all the townspeople know about her, and their whole job is to keep her knowledge of existence from the outside world like unknown. So after her being there, eyes sewn shut, mouth sewn shut, so she cannot curse anyone in the town, some unrest begins because there's sort of this, although we're in the 2000s and 2000 teens, Puritan feelings have started to erupt again, and the townsfolk get a little crazy, and from there some stuff happens with the witch, and it's hard to not tell too much about the story, but some stuff happens with the witch and sends them back to the 1600s, into the puritanical fervor of witch hunting and stuff of that sort. So this one is really, really amazing. And it actually was translated from Dutch to English, and the entire ending had been added for this English translation and changed the location from the Netherlands to Black Spring, a made-up town in the Hudson Valley area that he lived in. So it's really, really interesting. And I'm reading his next book, and it's also incredible, and great horror writer, not just, I just can't say enough good things about this. I think for this Halloween season, it's really, really a good choice to pick up. My next book is also witch themed, but this is a historical fiction. This is The Manning Tree Witches by A.K. Blakemore. This is also her first novel as well. This takes place in the 1600s in England, just before the Salem witch trials take place. What's so interesting about this is that it's at this period of time where the English Civil War is happening. So there's a lot of men are either dead or off to war. And so the towns are filled with mostly women and their daughters. And so this made it obviously very easy for witchcraft and heresy to be bred. So when we have Becky here, and here is, forget his name, but the puritanical John moves into town, and he then starts to see when a kid gets sick or someone curses a neighbor, a woman who is down on her luck curses her neighbor, he then sees it as witchcraft and heresy. And it's actually based on entirely true stories. He wrote down everything that happened in a journal and diary, and a journal that then was actually published and kept the full account of the story. And so then she took that and then created The Manning Tree Witches. And it's really actually funny too. I like the review that was on it that said that it was like Fleabag mixed with Hilary Mantel. So really there's a lot of humor in it, that the characters like Becky, she like says really kind of raunchy stuff sometimes that you don't think of for people in the 1600s, but like they were real people just like us too. And I think she does a really good job bringing these people to life through the good times and the horrors that Becky had to go through being suspected as a witch. And so this one is a great historical fiction witch story for October. This is actually, this next book, the most recent book I finished, which is The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward. This book is a horror, but also very much a mystery. Stephen King's review of it says that you will not know what happens till the very end, and that is extremely true. You go into it with an alcoholic man who lives in a house that's totally boarded up, as the front cover portrays, and there is a cat who lives with him who also is extremely into Jesus and is extremely into talking about the Lord. And you go into a very confused thinking it may be something like ghosts or a haunting of some sort. And then as more layers are unraveled, you find out there's a girl who lives with him, he says is his daughter. And he goes out into the woods and talks about his mother all the time. His mother seems to not been so good to him. And as you get through the story, that's really very dark, but perfect for right now in October. It sort of unfolds itself in like this really, really satisfying way that you think, oh, okay, so this is what's happening. And then you're like, and then something else is revealed, and then you don't, and then you're like, oh, so okay, then this must be happening. And so then, even then, you still think there's something going on. You think you got it, and then you don't, because she reveals once another layer to the story, and not until the very end it comes together, and she puts it together in like the perfect bow, where although a lot of dark things happen in the story ends with really positive and sort of hopeful energy of healing. And so I really enjoyed that she took you through this sort of ride when reading it. So I think this one is a really good horror that ends with something pretty positive for a horror. So really enjoyed this. And then also what happens in the story, she had consulted with some friends who are professionals in the subject, so it's really true to what happens in real life. And so I think that's what also makes it really excellent. Moving on to not such real life, this Grady Hendrix, My Best Friend's Exorcism, another perfect October pick that's shaped like a VHS box right here. Not so realistic, but a really funny, just sort of quick Halloween read, where it's just sort of like, I don't know how it's not a movie yet. It's just like a perfect like 80s, like girls in a Jeep going to the beach, and then all of a sudden they come home and one of their friends is possessed by a demon, and no one believes the main character that her friend is possessed at all, because at one point the demon finally gets in control of her and she comes out totally normal and whatever. But it's sort of I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. It's sort of like a perfect 80s packaging of cult worshiping. They're trying to say people are out praising Satan, like a la Geraldo Riviera sort of situation. And it's just really creepy, and there are really dark parts that I honestly like. Even reading Stephen King, I was like, some things in here were kind of really scary, but then also super funny, like cut with like jokes to Madonna or just like Diane Sawyer, something just like that brings it to like this other level that is like so campy and funny that it's like, I just couldn't put it down because it was just so, I don't want to say stupid, but stupid funny in like the way you just were like, I can't believe you came up with that. Like, it's so funny. Like, I don't know how no one else had thought of this. So this one, really great. I love this. This author, next coming up, very well known, Margaret Atwood, The Testaments. I'm surprised to learn how many people who've read The Handmaid's Tale who have not read The Testaments. But this is like the sequel done right. It follows not, I'm forgetting her name totally right now, the main character of the first book, but it does not follow her. It follows Aunt Lydia Offred. There we go. I'm like off. Does not follow Offred, like such as the TV show continues. It's pretty far into the future, not that far. A couple of like almost a decade into the future, with Aunt Lydia and two other girls as the main characters, who Aunt Lydia is sort of writing in a journal throughout the story. And then these two girls, one is escaped and lives in Canada, and the other is a commander's daughter. So you get this really cool perspective of Gilead in the future. And so if you haven't read The Testaments, but have read The Handmaid's Tale, and you even have seen the series, you can go ahead and read this, because it really gives you perspective pretty far. And I think this is, I don't think she's a plan to write another one of these, because I think she ended it very perfectly. And I think it also ends with a pretty positive note that you would not expect from The Handmaid's Tale at all. And I think there's not a lot I can say without giving away the entire story, but I think it's definitely worth it. It still has a lot of, what I liked is it had a little bit more political depth than Handmaid's Tale, where you sort of get into the real nitty gritty Obviously, from writing from the perspective of Aunt Lydia, you get more into sort of that side. You get to see more of it like you do in like the TV show. So if you have read The Handmaid's Tale, you need to read The Testaments. It's required reading. Okay. And then last but not least, Donna Tartt's The Secret History. I just read this. I just read this and it instantly became my favorite book. And if you live in the area of Southern Vermont, you like have to read this book. Kirstin was talking about dark academia. This is like dark academia to a T. And I think it also like you have read it, but you know someone who's about to go to college, or really at any age, you have to give this as a gift because it is so perfectly packaged together. It's a mystery that is, you already know someone is murdered from the instant you pick up the book, and then it's just the crazy psychological unraveling of why these characters did it, how they all sort of came together. You really get into, yeah, I love The Secret History. Thank you, Carol. They really came together so well, and I really just like cannot recommend this to enough people, and I just get it into everyone's hands who is looking for like, they're like, oh, I don't like mysteries. Like some people come in and don't like mysteries, but they want a really good novel or fiction. I'm like, well, this has mystery in it, but you get to say it's just like it's a fiction, it's a literary novel. And it really is so good. And I don't know how this did not win the Pulitzer Prize, honestly. I think this is so good. And I think that, again, I know it's a little bit on the older side, but if you've read it, I really suggest you pass it on to someone who has not read it because it's so incredible. So that is it. Thank you.
Connor, thank you so much. That was fantastic. We're just about out of time, and thank you all so much for joining us tonight. A few notes again, please, as Rachel said at the beginning, please order early for the supply chain issues. A lot of our events have been delayed. A lot of authors we've moved things around because publication dates have been delayed. I keep hearing about more and more of them, it seems like. Try to do that. Shop early, shop local. October is the new December, as the American Booksellers Association is saying. And then likewise, Rachel just posted the link for all of the books that were recommended tonight. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you at another virtual event soon, another Northshire Presents. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great evening. Sit down.